Hey guys, welcome to Box Office Addict. Let's break down Indiana Jones 5 and how it's performed. Well, I would like to say mediocre, but honestly, it's just not very good. We're past the point of mediocrity into absolute disaster mode. I don't know what they're thinking at Disney. I don't know what's going on with Bob Iger and Kathleen Kennedy. It's tumultuous times. I mean, we have the writer strike going on right now. A lot of shows and movies are going to be delayed. There is no late night television, which isn't necessarily a bad thing for those of us who are a fan of actual comedy. What are we going to do without Jimmy Fallon's hilarious monologues? How are we going to get through our lives? But Indiana Jones, man, this is just brutal. This is absolutely brutal. We knew this was coming. The tracking was saying 60 million. The reviews weren't great. I was still kind of thinking maybe closer to release the film would do better. My parents both asked me separately if I wanted to go see this, so I thought, well, maybe the boomers are interested. Deadline says here this isn't setting records for franchise finale. Well, no shit, it isn't setting records. Let's see, is looking to hit the bottom rung of its tracking projection of 60 million Sunday morning. There's no question this is a disastrous result for the finale to a historically beloved franchise film. Come on, Indiana Jones is one of the reasons why Disney shelled out $4 billion for Lucasfilm. Global start here at 130 million and $10 million less than they were saying. Nancy will have more. The fan loathed Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I like they just put Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull. Had a $272 million global start, unadjusted for inflation. The currency swings back in 2008. A few things to stomach. Not only did Star Wars bomb Solo open higher than Dial of Destiny with 84.4 million and 103.4 day, but did Paramount's seventh sequel Transformers Rise of the Beast 61 million. How could Disney and Lucasfilm mess this up? I mean, I don't know why you're asking this question. It's kind of obvious they've been messing things up now for about, I would say, the last 4 to 5 years. I would say they were doing pretty good when Force Awakens and Rogue One came out, and then it all started to fall apart during The Last Jedi, which is obvious, but it really got worse from that point on with the Disney Plus shows and the sequels and Rise of the Skywalker not performing as well, and really not being defended like the previous two were by the fans of those movies. And then, yeah, Solo bombed. So I think this was pretty obvious. I don't think there was a universe. Maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I don't think there was really a universe where an Indiana Jones sequel was going to be a hit in a post-COVID world, which they had to know on some level. Yesterday, I learned from a key source that Dial of the Destiny, before its $100 million in estimated production and advertising, cost promotion and advertising. My bad. Cost a mind-boggling 300 million plus, much higher than the 295 million that's been leaked out there. Yeah, the 300 million is much higher than the 295. Disney doesn't comment on budgets, and I'm getting some pushback, but the high price tag here is due to the start of production during COVID. Harrison Ford's $20 million fee, which I'm told director James Mangold got a pretty penny, with Steven Spielberg reaping as is a standard huge producing fee. That said, it stands to reason Disney would invest greatly here to revive a franchise. How are you reviving a franchise when you're putting an 80-year-old actor in the lead role, and then Fleabag chick? I know Phoebe Bridgewater, but you're putting in Fleabag chick, and how is this kicking off a franchise? They're acting like this is The Force Awakens, where it's like we have a new cast and we're bringing back the old cast again. That wasn't the promise of this movie. Trying to find something here. Lackluster reviews, blah blah. It's baffling that a storied franchise can end on a downer note at the box office in its finale. I found the movie out of can to be a plug and play, laden in tropes of the franchise, from the kid sidekick to video game like action to his goddaughter, not his dad, as his other sidekick. It's completely lacked the breadth and nuance that Steven Spielberg provided in action scenes of the older films, and I'm a James Mangold fan. He knows how to make a styled and dramatically charged movie just like Spielberg, where it's Logan, Ford versus Ferrari, or Walk the Line. That's all true. James Mangold's a decent director, but good directors make bad product under Disney. So what the hell went wrong here? Lucasfilm is so precious and fastidious when it comes to developing Star Wars property, and the legend with Indiana Jones is that these movies could never be made unless George Lucas and Spielberg. I love they're saying that they were so precious and careful with the Star Wars properties. No, they were not. That's a big reason why the franchise is where it's at. They've done a horrible job being precious and developing that. They went in with that trilogy without a plan for all three stories. They changed directors, they changed plot threads, and they canceled how many movies now? They've canceled like 6 movies. So I don't know why this article is trying to spin it as if they put care into Star Wars. And yes, of course, the Top Gun Maverick comparison is valid. That movie made 1.4 billion and was a total nostalgia. Get an older actor to go back and play an iconic role. Granted, it's the first sequel to Top Gun, where Indiana Jones already had a trilogy that most people felt completed the story, and then we got a fourth Indiana Jones film, which, yeah, I don't think a lot of us are big fans of. And then, of course, we have this film now, which feels just completely useless. I think in a lot of ways, some people can accept that Indiana Jones isn't quite the franchise that people perceive it as. I think that's a big factor here. I think Indiana Jones was really big in the 80s and 90s. I think it's huge and iconic. They were some of the highest grossing films ever. They were big Steven Spielberg hits, and those were the kind of movies he got really famous for, was making these big blockbusters before he became more of a serious filmmaker chasing Oscars and doing historical pieces. But if you take Indiana Jones out of the context of the 80s and the 90s, well, then it's just doing James Bond with the old guy. It's not. If you rebooted Indiana Jones, let's say in the late 90s, early 2000s, and you would recast the part. And I know a lot of people say you can't do that. I think that's ridiculous. I think you can totally recast Indiana Jones. Sean Connery is just as iconic as James Bond as Harrison Ford was for Indiana Jones to 80s kids. But by the 90s, people weren't thinking about Sean Connery with James Bond. They were thinking about the character. Same thing could have been true for Indiana Jones. I think Lucas and Spielberg making Kingdom of the Crystal Skull honestly ruined the possibility of that ever happening. Or, hey, maybe you continue the storyline with the Mutt Williams character, who I actually don't hate. I know some people hate that character. I don't think he was that bad. But here you are with this movie, and yeah, it's just a franchise that the only people going to see it are the hardcore fan base that are probably skewing older. And I just don't think some people can accept that Indiana Jones isn't that popular. It's not this thing where, well, anytime you just make an Indiana Jones movie, it's going to be a hit. Also, these adventure treasure hunting kind of movies, like the recent Uncharted, it made $400 million. But I think that's about the max for these movies. We're kind of past this genre too. Think about the National Treasure movies. Those were pretty big hits with Nicolas Cage for a little while, but I don't know if that genre of movie is really that big of a deal anymore. I just think it lacks something. I love those kind of movies. I miss them making movies like this, but I just don't think it has the popularity it used to have with a younger audience. So let's just look at its box office real quick and then we'll talk about some other films. So I guess they're saying $82 million over the 4th of July holiday weekend. So this is including Monday, unless this opened early, and that's where this comes from. So 60 million over the 3 day at 4,600 theaters, 82 million domestically, 152 million worldwide. Initial opening weekend worldwide, 130 million. This film cost $300 million, so it's very similar to The Flash. It opened slightly better than The Flash. The Flash opened to 55 million and 139 million. I do think this film is going to hold better than The Flash, which is dropping faster than I've seen most blockbusters ever do. But this is still bad. I mean, this is still 200 million domestic seems unlikely with numbers like this, unless the word of mouth is decent, which it could be. We don't know. Maybe this movie will pick up some momentum, but I don't think it's making much more than 200 mil domestic if it reaches that. And then the international numbers aren't great either. This looks like this might not even make 400 million worldwide. I mean, it should be able to. I think it can. But with a $300 million budget, they're going to lose over $100 million off this movie, if not more. This could honestly become one of the biggest bombs we've seen in recent memory. If it wasn't for The Flash, this would be number one winner. So let's look at The Flash. 67% drop. $99 million. It hasn't even made $100 million yet. It's at 245 million worldwide on a $300 million budget, and then let's add promotion, $100 million. And then you have to factor in that the theaters split like 50-50. I think the studios keep 55% and the theaters keep 45%. So they're only getting half of the gross of this movie so far. So let's say that they've made about 45 million, 50-ish million domestically, and then worldwide altogether, they've made like $122 million on a $400 million investment. This is going to be one of the biggest bombs ever. I didn't know if it was going to be that kind of movie at first, but it's very clear now this is going to be one of the biggest bombs in the history of blockbusters. This film is scratching to not even make $120 million domestic. Complete and utter disaster all around. Horrible job by Warner Brothers. Ezra Miller didn't help with the situation, but it has to be more than that, than just the controversy with Ezra Miller. People just did not want to go see this movie. People had no interest in this damn movie, and they tried everything they could to get people to go see it. And they tried to get anyone they could to say it was actually good, and it did not work out. But that is embarrassing. That's so embarrassing that it's making Disney's disaster of Indiana Jones seem slightly better by comparison, which is really funny. Also, maybe just this older actor thing. Michael Keaton as Batman, Harrison Ford. Maybe that era's kind of done too. I know people keep bringing up Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise is usually an exception. Also, he's part of franchises. Is it that we all love Tom Cruise, or is it that people around the world have grown to love the Mission Impossible franchise, or they love the movie Top Gun? The Tom Cruise films that aren't those franchises, they don't make that kind of money. So I think it's more of him being smart with his choices. Like, I love Edge of Tomorrow. I think that's a great movie. That movie wasn't a big hit. I like the first Jack Reacher film. It did okay. But then when he is part of a franchise that people love, it does well. So I think it's also that too. Those are just popular franchises. But we'll see what happens with Dead Reckoning Part 1 coming out in July. Because I'm hearing some early word of mouth that the film is good, but not quite as good as Fallout. I hate to see this with Asteroid City. Wes Anderson, 58% drop after a decent opening weekend of 9 million in wide release. Still, the film's at 29 million. It could probably make 50 to 60 million worldwide. Wes Anderson movies typically aren't big hits. Grand Budapest Hotel and Moonrise Kingdom and Royal Tenenbaums are exceptions to this rule. The Little Mermaid continues to underperform, but do okay, 526 million worldwide. It's still not quite at a break-even point, but it's getting close, so they'll probably break even on that movie, but they will not make a big profit. The Jennifer Lawrence comedy No Hard Feelings had a decent drop. It's now at 29 million domestic, 49 million worldwide. I'm hoping this film can make 100 million worldwide, just so some studios think maybe we can make some R-rated comedies again. Elemental continues to hold decent, but it's still not doing very well. It's under 200 million worldwide. This film cost $200 million. Just a disaster. Now Sony, on the other hand, with Across the Spider-Verse, that movie's at 607 million. The domestic still outperforms the international numbers on a $100 million budget. So this film is a big hit. And 650 million domestic is definitely possible for this. I think 700 million is going to be a little bit tough for this movie. The foreign numbers just aren't there. So if you look at everything here, Indiana Jones is a bomb. Elemental is a bomb. The Flash is a bomb. The Little Mermaid's gonna just break even, and then Guardians 3 is making money. So Disney has quite a few poorly performing films out there right now. Sony does have No Hard Feelings, which isn't doing great, but they also have Spider-Man. Paramount has Transformers Rise of the Beast, which is at 381 million worldwide, which honestly isn't horrible. And it's already doing better than Bumblebee domestically. I don't know if it'll outgross Bumblebee worldwide. I do believe Bumblebee made like 460 million or something like that. And then Fast X, that franchise, is pretty much done domestically, 145 million. It's about to pass 700 million worldwide, which is close to what Fast 9 performed at. It looks like 700 million is the cutoff for this franchise now. There will not be another $1 billion Fast and the Furious film. So looking at everything here, this has just been a rough month at the box office. We're in July now. Hopefully Barbie, which is the tracking numbers are coming in closer to 80 million, and Oppenheimer will boost the box office because right now we are just getting the bare bones. Now, this has to be said though, and I know this has been reiterated many times, the budgets on these movies are the problem. If this Indiana Jones film had cost $150 million instead of $300 million, and I think $150 million is the correct budget, even if you're paying Harrison Ford $20 million and James Mangold, you should still be able to make an Indiana Jones film for $150 million. What about the de-aging technology? Well, don't fucking de-age Indiana Jones for the movie and don't spend the money on that because it's stupid and it didn't pay off. Do something else. Come up with a better idea. Then the $60 million opening wouldn't honestly look that bad. You could live with the film making $400 million. If Elemental had cost $100 million, it would look a lot better right now. If The Little Mermaid hadn't cost $250 million, if it had cost $150 million, let's even say if The Little Mermaid had cost $185 million, still a pretty hefty budget, things would look a little bit better right now. So the spending is the real big issue here. They have to stop making movies for that amount of money, and some people are trying to say, well, that's just because of COVID. No, they were making $200 million movies pre-COVID. This is the direction things have been going for a few years. Budgets always go up. The last thing I want to point out here is about ticket sales. We don't often track ticket sales anymore. It's kind of fallen out in the box office discussion. When I first became a box office addict, when I first started to really get into it back in the I don't know, the mid 2000, like 2005, 2006, when I was a teenager. And I always kind of followed it, but started to follow it really seriously and study it and find old, variety articles and People magazines and Rolling Stones and trying to go look up what they used to say about this because that was the only way you could get the box office reported back in the day was through like the magazines and the newspaper, the trades. There's something that Hollywood's been lying to people about for a long time. Not necessarily lying, but they've been hiding the information. So, like I said, when I first got into talking about the box office, we always looked at adjusted for inflation all the time. That was the most common thing. Is you'd be like, well, is this film actually this highest grossing film of this year? But when you adjust it for inflation, it's not even in the top 10 highest grossing films. Now, there's a lot of factors here, obviously, that always have to be conceded. Video games didn't used to be a thing. Television was a lot more limited back in the day. We didn't have streaming services. They didn't have home video back when a lot of the movies made the money they did, or they had very limited home video. It was very expensive. It used to cost $100 to buy a VHS tape. So there's a lot of that. But still, we used to look at the adjusted numbers. We used to look at ticket sales. The reason that they don't like to focus on ticket sales anymore, and you don't hear about this anymore, is that over the decades, ticket sales have been diminishing every 10 years. Every 10 years, less tickets are sold than the 10 years before that. And they try to spin it like, oh, well, these numbers are bad, but Top Gun did well 2 years ago, or this movie did well recently. But what they never really focus on is that movies aren't selling the tickets that they used to. And what that says is that movies in general aren't the media entertainment juggernaut that they once were. And if that narrative really got out, that it's not only that the modern movie fan base is diminishing and people going to the movie theater, Zoomers not really liking going to the movie theater just for fun. They only go for specific movies that seem like they have to be advertised through TikTok or what have you. But they also ignore the fact that in general, before that, less people have just been going to the movies than they did in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 50s. Just less and less and less people are going to the movies. So they tried to make it a global market. And now that's backfired on them. And they keep trying to push this idea, look how important we are. Look how important filmmakers are and directors are, and writers and actors. We are important. We are the elite. We make art. We set the cultural standard. We are the tastemakers. But in reality, that group of people, the Hollywood people, the people who make movies, the people who want to make movies, the people who want to do television shows, they've become less relevant every decade. And the curtain is getting pulled now. So even if you don't look at ticket sales which if we looked at ticket sales for Indiana Jones, I'm sure they're abysmal. This made $60 million, but the ticket prices are through the roof now compared to what they used to be. You used to be able to go see a movie for $5, and that was the regular price, sometimes less. And now there might be special deals like that on a Tuesday or something at your local theater. But what I'm trying to say here is people just aren't that into movies anymore. That doesn't mean that people aren't into movies. Clearly, the older generations, they still like to watch movies. A lot of people in my generation, millennials, are still into movies. But it's not the same. It's not this big thing where you go out every Friday to go see the new movie, good or bad. It used to not matter. People just went to go see stuff because that was the thing to do, and they liked it. They enjoyed it. It wasn't just because they had nothing else to do. It's because they liked going to see movies. It was exciting to go see movies. It was fun to go see movies. But they keep hyping us and selling us on this theatrical experience. This idea that you're going to go there and watch it on the big screen and be absorbed and enjoy it with other people. And I think it's a lie. I don't think it's true. I think it's people remembering how they felt at a certain time in their lives and projecting that onto the theatrical experience and not really what it's like to go see a movie in the theater. Because honestly, it's not that great. It can be fun, it can be a good time, but it's not a concert. It's not some intimate experience you're having with the movie because you can have that anywhere. And it's just sad that Hollywood didn't see maybe the way to keep people involved with this was to evolve the form itself, to make the experience itself. I remember, and all the cinephiles, letterbox community is going to hate me for this, but I remember I never liked the Alamo Drafthouse thing. I never liked the stigma back when I was younger that was like, people shouldn't be on cell phones in a movie theater. People should never talk in a movie theater. They even used to have ads at Alamo Drafthouse in Austin where they would make fun of that if somebody, because they would ban you from the theater if you got caught on the phone more than once or twice, if you got a warning. And it was like, how dare a jackass come in here and be on their cell phone? Now, listen, I understand all that. I get being annoyed in the theater when people are talking when they're on their phone. But I remember saying back then to those people, and I'm not trying to do a fuck you, I was right sort of thing. We're like, oh, now look how right I was and you guys were wrong. But I remember saying to people at the time that I was friends with or people that, worked in the theater, worked at theaters or were movie fans. And, I would say to them, that's really stupid in our world because at some point that technology is going to be stronger than the theatrical experience. And you're telling young people, you see this a lot at jobs, don't be on your phone at work, don't be on your phone at work. And they try to get on to people for that. And then more and more people aren't committed to their jobs because of that. Well, this idea at the time of like, oh, well, if you're in the theater, you have to be quiet, you have to pay attention, that's backfired. That mentality, that cinephile mentality, how dare you ruin the sacred experience of what this is? How dare you? I paid to come see this movie. I came to pay attention and focus to this movie, and you're going to ruin it. You're going to ruin it by having a light at your chair while I'm in here. I'm going to have somebody come over. You could sell people out at the theater. You could hold your hand up and point them out. It was like that one, go get him. It was awful. And it created a mentality of we're better than you. The people who love movies, we're better than the common person. We're better than the kids who like their cell phones. And then guess what's happened? People are making videos on their cell phones. People are watching videos on their cell phones, and they're not going to a movie theater because there's no interactive nature to it, because they think it's boring, because they don't have the attention span for it. And honestly, the movie doesn't warrant your attention span. It was a lot of self-importance, and there was a lot of people who made money out of this. Not just in the industry, but people who were film critics that ran film festivals. It was a whole world. And that world always kind of had its nose up. And I always thought at the time, and it's come to fruition, that was going to backfire. Now I wouldn't be shocked if theaters create a format where they embrace people using their cell phones and making TikToks in the theater. Because at this point, I don't know how you get people to go see a movie in the theater. I think those days are on their last leg. And I think a lot of it was because theaters refused to modernize. And it wasn't just a modernizing with technology or anything, because they tried gimmicks. They tried 3D. They tried the IMAX experience, and it worked for a little while. What they really didn't modernize with was where culture was going. And it wasn't going to this kind of attitude of like movies are the mecca of visual entertainment. And I think a lot of people took themselves too seriously, and I think they took movies too seriously, and I fell into that too. I'm not saying that I'm not part of that problem. But when you do that long enough, when you ignore the normies, when you act like you're better than everyone else, well, eventually, sadly, history has shown us normies win.